Welcome to AppleKnows channel. I am Apple, and today I will tell you things about diseases and vaccines that sound so unbelievable you might think they belong in a thriller, but every single fact is true. Let's begin with a reminder of how fragile and strange human history has been when it comes to infections. Imagine this. In the 18th century, smallpox was one of the deadliest diseases on Earth. It left survivors scarred for life, and in many cases, blind. Yet the first vaccine in history was made not in a laboratory but by using pus from a cow's blister. Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who got cowpox, a mild disease, never caught smallpox. He scratched cowpox material into a boy's arm in 1796, and that single risky act became the foundation of all modern vaccines. Think about it, one boy's arm and the courage of one doctor changed the fate of humanity. But here's something more shocking. Smallpox didn't just kill millions, it shaped entire empires. In the 16th century, when Europeans came to the Americas, the disease spread faster than the soldiers themselves. In some areas, more than 80% of the native population died not from war, but from smallpox. A virus destroyed civilizations faster than weapons ever could. And today, it is the only human disease that has been completely eradicated worldwide. No other disease in history has been entirely wiped out by humans. Another fact that feels unreal is connected to rabies. Rabies is almost 100% fatal once symptoms appear. There is no cure. No treatment. If the virus reaches your brain, it causes terrifying symptoms like hydrophobia, the fear of water, or even trying to swallow a sip feels impossible. But the shocking part is this: the vaccine works even after exposure. If you are bitten by a rabid animal, getting the vaccine in time can save your life, making rabies one of the only deadly infections where you can still be rescued after contact. And think about polio. In the 1940s and 1950s, parents lived in fear of summer because polio outbreaks left thousands of children paralyzed overnight. Hospitals filled with so-called iron lungs, giant metal machines that kept people breathing because the virus destroyed their muscles. Today, because of vaccines, polio has nearly vanished from the planet. Only a few countries still see cases, and the day we announce its eradication may not be far away. What's mind-bending is that some people alive right now once lived inside those iron lungs for years, and a handful still do. Here's a fact that sounds like horror science fiction. The Black Death, caused by plague bacteria in the 14th century, killed up to 50 million people in Europe, almost half the population. But what most people don't know is that the bacteria responsible, Yersinia pestis, still exists today. It has not disappeared. In fact, every year, a few people in the United States still catch plague, usually from fleas on wild rodents. And yes, we have antibiotics to treat it now, but the idea that the same microbe that wiped out medieval Europe is still silently around us is chilling. Another detail that bends the mind is linked to measles. Most people think measles is just a childhood rash. But the virus is one of the most contagious pathogens on Earth. If one person has measles, 9 out of 10 people around them without immunity will get sick. But here's the twist: measles doesn't just cause fever and spots. It can erase the immune system's memory. For up to 2 or 3 years after infection, your body forgets how to fight diseases you once had immunity against. Imagine surviving measles but then dying later from pneumonia or another infection your body should have known how to fight. That's one of the hidden reasons why measles vaccination saves so many more lives than people realize. And speaking of vaccines, here's something extraordinary. The fastest vaccine ever developed before COVID-19 was the mumps vaccine in the 1960s, which took about 4 years. But the COVID-19 vaccines were ready within a single year. People often doubt how fast that was, but the reality is scientists had been studying coronaviruses for decades, and new technology like mRNA made it possible to design vaccines faster than ever in history. This moment marked a revolution in medicine, showing that future vaccines for other deadly diseases might come much quicker than we ever thought possible. Let's keep going, because the deeper we go, the more shocking the facts become. Take tetanus for example. Most people know it as something connected with stepping on a rusty nail. But the truth is far stranger. The bacteria that causes tetanus, Clostridium tetani, doesn't actually come from the rust at all. It lives in the soil. The rusty nail is just a perfect delivery system because it punctures deep into the flesh and creates an oxygen-free pocket where the bacteria can thrive. Once inside, it produces a toxin so powerful that even a small dose can cause violent muscle spasms so strong they can break bones. And yet, the tetanus vaccine works by teaching your immune system to fight off that exact toxin, not the bacteria itself. In other words, the vaccine protects you against the deadliest part of the disease, not the germ behind it. Now let's move to influenza, the flu. Every year we hear about the flu shot, but many don't realize that the flu virus is one of the most unpredictable enemies we face. The 1918 influenza pandemic killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide, more than both world wars combined. Entire communities were erased within weeks. What's chilling is that scientists have dug up bodies frozen in Alaskan permafrost to study the virus that caused it. They literally resurrected genetic material from victims buried for almost a century to understand how it worked, so that something like 1918 could hopefully never happen again. But if you want a fact that really twists your mind, think about leprosy. Most of history portrayed it as a curse, a punishment, something people feared so deeply that lepers were isolated from society. But here's the truth, leprosy is actually not very contagious. Around 95% of humans are naturally immune. And yet, the disease's reputation shaped entire cultures, forcing people to live in leper colonies for life. Today, it is fully treatable with antibiotics, but the ancient fear still lingers in our imagination. Another astonishing detail, hepatitis B vaccine was the first vaccine to ever prevent a type of cancer. Hepatitis B can lead to liver cancer, and by vaccinating people against the virus, we indirectly prevent thousands of cancer cases every year. It's not just about fighting infections, it's literally stopping cancer before it can start. And here's something unsettling about the bubonic plague again. Scientists discovered that the Black Death didn't just kill millions, it left a permanent genetic mark on survivors. Certain immune system genes in Europeans today show traces of adaptation from that medieval pandemic. In other words, the plague changed human DNA, and we are still carrying its legacy centuries later. Let's not forget about smallpox once more. After it was eradicated, the world faced a strange ethical problem. Only 2 official samples of the virus remain, one in the United States and one in Russia. Some argue they should be destroyed forever to eliminate any risk. Others say they must be kept for research in case a new outbreak ever arises. This means that one of the deadliest killers in human history still exists, locked away in laboratories, with the entire world trusting that it never escapes. And now consider cholera, a disease caused by contaminated water. In the 19th century, people had no idea what caused it. Some believed it spread through bad air or miasma. But one doctor, John Snow, in 1854 mapped cholera cases in London and discovered they all surrounded one water pump. By removing the pump's handle, he stopped the outbreak. That single act was the birth of modern epidemiology, the science of tracking and stopping diseases. One pump, one handle, and millions of lives saved in the future. Take syphilis for example. In the early 20th century, before antibiotics, doctors tried all sorts of bizarre treatments. One of the strangest was deliberately infecting patients with malaria. Why? Because the fevers caused by malaria were sometimes high enough to kill the syphilis bacteria. Afterward, doctors would then treat the malaria itself with quinine. Imagine being told you'd be injected with a deadly parasite as part of your cure. And yet, before penicillin arrived, this risky method actually saved lives. Now consider HIV. When it first appeared in the 1980s, it was a death sentence. Entire communities were devastated. But here is the shocking fact: today, with proper treatment, people with HIV can live nearly normal lifespans. Antiviral medications suppress the virus so effectively that in many cases, it becomes undetectable in the blood. And when it's undetectable, it's untransmittable. This means that a virus once associated only with tragedy has now been turned into one of medicine's greatest success stories, thanks to relentless research. But here's another strange truth: vaccines don't just protect humans. They protect animals too. There are vaccines for dogs against rabies, for chickens against bird flu, and even for fish in aquaculture farms. One of the most fascinating examples is the effort to vaccinate wild animals by dropping vaccine-filled baits into forests to stop rabies outbreaks in foxes and raccoons. Entire ecosystems are shaped by the simple act of vaccinating. Let's not forget tuberculosis, or TB. In the 19th century, it was called the White Plague because of how it wasted people away. What's unbelievable is that 1/3 of the world's population still carries the TB bacteria silently in their bodies. Most never get sick, but if the immune system weakens, it can suddenly activate and become deadly. And yet, the TB vaccine, BCG, doesn't fully prevent the disease in adults, which makes TB one of the hardest infections to finally eliminate. And here's something that sounds like it belongs in a horror novel. There's a brain disease called Kuru that once spread among tribes in Papua New Guinea through ritual cannibalism, specifically, eating the brains of deceased relatives. The disease was caused by prion, misfolded proteins that slowly destroy the brain, leading to trembling, loss of control, and eventually death. It's related to mad cow disease. There is no cure, no vaccine, and it can incubate silently for decades. The fact that something so deadly spreads simply through cultural practice is both haunting and fascinating. Another fact that bends the mind is linked to vaccines made from unexpected sources. The original polio vaccine was grown using cells from monkey kidneys. Later, other vaccines were developed using cells derived from a fetus in the 1960s, which have been replicated in labs ever since. The same cell lines are still used today, decades later, meaning some of the most important vaccines in history all trace back to a single moment in medical research more than half a century ago. And here's something wild about Ebola. When the first big outbreaks happened in Africa, the virus killed up to 90% of those infected. Entire villages disappeared. For years, no vaccine existed. But recently, scientists developed a vaccine that not only protects people before exposure but can also work after someone has been in contact with the virus, much like rabies. What once looked like the end of the world has now become a disease that can be contained with science. Consider anthrax. It's a disease caused by Bacillus anthracis, and while it naturally infects animals, it has also been turned into a biological weapon. In 2001, shortly after the September 11 attacks, anthrax spores were mailed to U.S. government offices and media outlets. Just a few letters caused 22 cases and 5 deaths, sparking national panic. What makes anthrax terrifying is that its spores can survive in soil for decades, essentially sleeping until they find a new host. Some places contaminated during experiments in the 1940s are still dangerous today, over 70 years later. Now let's talk about yellow fever. In the 19th century, it wiped out thousands in American cities like New Orleans and Philadelphia. People didn't know mosquitoes were the carriers. Soldiers in wars feared yellow fever more than bullets. But here's the shocking fact: the vaccine, developed in the 1930s, is still one of the most effective ever created. A single dose can give lifelong immunity. Think about that, one shot can protect you for life, something modern medicine still struggles to repeat. Another chilling truth comes from diphtheria. This disease strangles its victims by creating a thick gray membrane in the throat, making it impossible to breathe. In the 1920s, diphtheria killed thousands of children every year. But in 1925, when an outbreak threatened Nome, Alaska, a relay of sled dogs carried life-saving antitoxin across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness. That desperate race inspired the famous Iditarod sled dog race still held today. It wasn't just a story of survival, it was vaccines and medicine carried on the backs of animals through blizzards to save an entire town. Here's something most people don't realize about whooping cough, or pertussis. It doesn't just cause coughing. In infants, the cough can be so severe that babies turn blue or even stop breathing. Before vaccines, pertussis killed tens of thousands of children every year. What's shocking is that the bacteria evolved. Even with vaccines, new strains emerged that weakened immunity over time. It's a constant arms race between microbes and human science. And then there's malaria. It has shaped human history more than almost any other disease. Ancient armies lost battles not to swords, but to swarms of infected mosquitoes. Malaria has killed more people throughout history than all wars combined. The fascinating fact is that certain human genetic mutations exist today solely because of malaria. For example, sickle cell trait, which can cause a painful blood disorder, actually provides protection against malaria. Entire populations evolved differently just to survive one parasite. Now let's return to vaccines with a story that feels almost unbelievable. In 1955, when the first polio vaccines were distributed in the US, a manufacturing mistake known as the Cutter incident caused thousands of children to be exposed to live poliovirus instead of the inactivated one. Over 200 were paralyzed, and 10 died. It was a devastating tragedy, but it also transformed vaccine safety forever, leading to the strict regulations and testing standards that protect billions today. Out of disaster came a revolution in how vaccines are made. And here's a mindbender: the HPV vaccine, given to teenagers today, prevents cervical cancer later in life. Just like hepatitis B, it stops a virus before it can trigger cancer cells to form. This means some vaccines don't just fight infections, they literally prevent cancers decades in advance. That's not just saving lives in the present, it's changing the future of human health. Let's go even deeper, because the stranger the history of diseases and vaccines gets, the harder it becomes to look away. Consider smallpox once again, but from a darker angle. During the French and Indian War in the 18th century, British officers discussed using blankets contaminated with smallpox to deliberately infect Native American tribes. There's evidence this was actually attempted, making it one of the earliest examples of biological warfare in history. Think about it, a disease that already killed millions was weaponized to wipe out entire populations. Now look at cholera again. When it raged through Europe in the 19th century, people were so terrified that in some places, families buried loved ones within hours of death, sometimes before confirming they were truly gone. Fear of contagion was so strong that it blurred the line between medicine and panic. But here's the bizarre twist: today cholera can be treated quickly with something as simple as clean water mixed with salts and sugar. Oral rehydration therapy, one of the cheapest medical treatments in history, has saved tens of millions of lives. And what about the Spanish flu of 1918? What most people don't realize is that it didn't start in Spain. Spain was simply neutral during World War I, and its newspapers reported openly on the outbreak, while other countries censored their news to keep morale high. This made it look like Spain was the source, when in reality the virus was global. One of the deadliest pandemics in history carries the wrong name because of politics and censorship. Here's something haunting about vaccines and global security. In 1978, a photographer in Birmingham, England, entered a medical school where smallpox samples were being studied. She became infected due to a lab accident and died. That single event proved that even after eradication, one small breach could unleash devastation again. It was the last known death from smallpox, and it showed how fragile human victory over disease can be. Another shocking story is linked to guinea worms. For thousands of years, this parasite infected millions of people, burrowing into the body and eventually emerging slowly through the skin in agonizing fashion. The only way to remove it was to wind the worm around a stick a little each day until it came out, possibly inspiring the ancient symbol of medicine, the rod of Asclepius. But here's the extraordinary part: there is no vaccine, no drug. And yet, through clean water campaigns, guinea worm is now on the edge of eradication, with just a handful of cases left worldwide. It may become the second human disease ever eliminated from Earth, without medicine, just prevention. And here's a fact that almost sounds like science fiction. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union tested weaponized plague bacteria. They even developed strains resistant to antibiotics. Files declassified after the Cold War revealed entire secret programs dedicated to turning diseases into weapons of mass destruction. What once caused medieval death tolls was being engineered for modern warfare. That knowledge still haunts biosecurity experts today. Finally, let's look at measles one more time. During outbreaks, the virus has been shown to wipe out the immune system's memory, a phenomenon called immune amnesia. In one study, children who had measles lost up to 70% of their antibodies to other diseases, meaning their bodies forgot years of immunity. That means measles doesn't just make you sick once, it can erase your entire immune history, leaving you vulnerable as if you were never vaccinated at all. That's why measles vaccination is considered one of the most important in the world. And that brings us to the end of this journey. I am Apple, and this has been AppleKnows channel. What we've uncovered together is that diseases and vaccines are not just medical facts, they are stories of survival, mistakes, triumphs, and the thin line between life and death. From viruses that erased civilizations to vaccines that prevent cancers before they even begin, the history of human health is stranger and more shocking than fiction could ever be. The next time you hear about a simple vaccine or a disease long forgotten, remember, behind it lies a legacy of fear, sacrifice, discovery, and the fragile brilliance of human science. Stay curious, because the truth is always more powerful than the myths.